Hey everybody, welcome to the Otherppl Show. I'm Brad Listi, and I'm here in Los Angeles, California. It's nice to be with you. Hope everything is going all right. I have another flashback episode for you today. I am going to be sharing an outtake from episode 520, my conversation with author Jonathan Ames. It first aired on May 16th, 2018. Don't forget to subscribe to this show wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow the Otherppl podcast on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky. Jonathan Ames is the author of several books, including I Pass Like Night, The Extra Man, What's Not to Love, My Less Than Secret Life, The Alcoholic, The Double Life is Twice as Good, and most recently, a string of noir novels, including You Were Never Really Here, which was adapted into a film starring Joaquin Phoenix, another one called A Man Named Doll, and another called The Wheel of Doll. Jonathan Ames is also the creator of two television series, Blunt Talk and Bored to Death. An outtake from episode 520, my conversation with Jonathan Ames, is coming up in just a couple of minutes. A quick reminder that I do a weekly email newsletter. You can subscribe for free over at Substack. My newsletter lives over at Substack. I believe the website is bradlisti.substack.com. You can subscribe for free, and I will let you know on a weekly basis about the latest episodes of this podcast. I also share a list of links to things that I've been reading and finding interesting. So if that sounds good, go sign up for my newsletter over at Substack. Likewise, you can join the Otherppl Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. If you listen to this show regularly, if you like it, if you get something from it, I hope you will consider joining the Otherppl Patreon community. Help keep this thing going into the future. Patreon.com/otherpplpod. All right, so once again, today's flashback features an outtake from episode 520, my conversation with Jonathan Ames. It first aired on May 16th, 2018. A reminder that the full episode is available in the feed, so if you like this flashback, if you like this outtake, and you want to hear the full conversation, just go look for episode 520. It is there, waiting for you. All right, here I am, a few years ago, talking with Jonathan Ames.
No, I know, I just met you, we're all so madly insecure. This is the demon. We have these voices in our mind that are so unkind that we all have to manage to a greater or lesser degree. And anyway, some guy in college who I really looked up to, this graduate student, told me I wasn't a natural writer. And my grammar was terrible. I didn't understand the sentence until I actually was teaching composition in my late 20s at a business school. And I'd published a first novel, and I remember the editor saying, this is a run-on sentence, this is a run-on sentence, but they made sense to me. I'm like, well, anyway, so, for 30, 40 years, I haven't felt like a natural writer because that guy said it, and I really looked up to him. He had gone to Harvard. He was a bit effete, but he was one of these people that could declare things, like an Oscar Wilde.
What's he doing now?
Well, sadly, he did pass away, and I also really admired him. But anyway, but I'm like, holy cow, I've been surviving as a writer for 29 years now. My first book came out in 1989. That's a long time. I mean, a 29-year-old person is like mature. My career is 29 years old. But that's because I'm getting old myself or whatever.
Yeah, as are we all,
I know, you heard that it would happen, and then it actually happens.
I have this moment, not terribly frequently, but every once in a while you stop and you just go, oh, youth. Like I'll see young people, or I'll have some smell or some, sensory experience will bring me back, and you're just like, it's gone. It's sad.
Yeah, well, I find I do want to go to bed earlier. Anyway, let's not get onto this depressing topic. But I don't want to, actually, that's controlling. If you want to continue exploring,
no.
I could tell you my various ailments.
Here's a question I have for you regarding doing a lot of different things and jumping around like a flea or whatever it is. The decisions that you've made and the projects that you've taken on, and whether it's in television or writing essays or writing fiction or writing in a comedic vein or writing in a more crime or genre vein, like how do you make those decisions? Are they largely instinctive? Are you are they an outgrowth of conversations you're having with creative collaborators or somebody who's a trusted confidant? Like, how do you make the choices that you have made?
Yeah, I mean, I remember years ago some guy interviewing me, and I think it was probably like 2004 when my novel "Wake Up, Sir" came out, and when he interviewed me, he made it seem as if I must have had a master plan for everything, like that I would have this book come out at this time, and I think I was about to shoot a TV pilot, and there's been no master plan. It's been, I feel like, improvisation every step of the way. It's almost like walking along and finding like a penny on the ground, and you pick it up. I mean, obviously things would lead to it, like this latest vein of writing pulp fiction and writing a thriller. That was, in some ways, several, like, I wrote You Were Never Really Here, this most recent book, originally in 2012. But for about 4 or 5 years at that point, I'd been reading nonstop only crime novels and page-turners. And before that, I had a long fascination with Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. And then I got an opportunity from Byliner, which was a web magazine at the time, for a nice word count and a nice fee to write a piece of long-form fiction. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to write a thriller. So it wasn't like I had been planning for months or made this choice. Suddenly an opportunity arose, and I'd been reading all these novels by Richard Stark, these crime novels. And so then I took my whack at it. So it feels like things accrue, a reading or things I'm interested in, and then maybe an opportunity arises, then you go for it. Like back in the 90s, my second novel, The Extra Man, had been rejected by about 20 publishers. And I was brokenhearted, and I was going to give up on writing. This woman who was studying Zen Buddhism at the time said to me, whatever you hold on to will cause you pain. The notion of attachment. And I thought, you know what? I'm holding on to the dream of being a writer. And it's causing me pain. I've got to let go of this dream. So I made a list of other things to do. And then number 4 was revise the novel one more time, The Extra Man. And around that time, as I began to let go of the dream of being a writer, I did start feeling better. I'm like, okay, I will make something of my life. But a friend very kindly took part of the novel to an editor at the New York Press and read some of it to him out loud. And the editor at the New York Press said, I'll publish that. They got in touch with me, and so suddenly I took a piece of my novel out, kind of turned it into nonfiction, and had a piece published in the New York Press, and had published something for the first time in years. I really struggled between my first and second book. So then I developed a relationship with the New York Press, which was this free paper, late 90s New York, kind of pre-internet, an alternative free paper. They were publishing all sorts of weird stuff. And I published a few pieces with them, and then I saw that the big thing in that paper was to have a column. And I asked, could I have a column? And at first they said no, and then they came back to me and said yes. So then suddenly for 3 years, every 2 weeks I wrote a column. I got paid, I think, $250 a column. It was a main way I sustained myself in the late 90s along with teaching. And so then suddenly I had a nonfiction career, writing these columns. And then magazines came to me because of what they had read in those columns. And then I collected those into books. So these choices, they're just unusual in a way, or lucky.
You stumble into, but you got to know luck when it comes along. Like, you know what I'm saying? You have to find the penny.
Yeah, and you got to just keep putting stuff out there. So by putting the columns out there, that led to magazine work. And then and just And then I wrote a short story at some point called Bored to Death for Esquire magazine. And they didn't go for it. They didn't want to run it. It was too long. So then I sent it to McSweeney's, and they said, we'll go for it. And then around that time, even though I'm jumping all over the place, I'd sort of given up on ever making in Hollywood. I had this failed TV pilot in 2004. But then someone at HBO wanted to meet me just in a general meeting. And I hadn't done a Hollywood meeting for a while, but I had this story, Bored to Death, which wasn't going to be published yet. But I gave it to the executive, and I said, I think there could be a movie or TV show in this. And then she's like, yeah. So then I develop it. So you know what I mean? Like now, of course, I'm getting these opportunities, and people are wanting to meet me over the years, or a friend brings my stuff to the guy at New York Press. But it's not been some grand plan. It's been like rock climbing. You know, when you rock climb, you're like, okay, there's a crevice. I'll put my hand up there. And then sometimes your hand falls out. So I feel like that's how it's happened.
Well, and I think from the outside looking in, the tendency when someone has some success, especially in a career as perilous as the arts, the tendency is to want to believe that it was a linear path to the mountaintop, if there is even a mountaintop, or that there was some sort of grand strategic thinking that went into it. But really, it's like working hard, knowing an opportunity when it comes along, being willing to risk, being willing to be flexible. Because some people, I think, have very rigid and defined ideas about who they are creatively and what they're going to do. And you seem like somebody who, when somebody's been like, you want to try this? You said yes.
Yeah. And it's scary, too. You know, when I had never written a script like in 2004. But I got an opportunity. Again, here's like an interesting one. Again, I feel like there's probably a lot of writers who listen to your podcast and beginning writers, and beginning performers. So in the early 90s, I used to do these shows in New York at a nightclub called the Fez. And I was struggling to write, but I had found that when I spoke in front of a crowd, they laughed. It happened. I had gone to some AA meetings, and I would talk about my life, and everyone would laugh. I was like, wait, this is upsetting stuff, But then I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll just go on stage. And so I began to perform starting in 92 at this nightclub called the Fez, and I had my own little underground following that filled this nightclub, and I do
Why have I heard of the Fez? Is it like a famous place?
It was a well-known place. It was open for about 13 years. It was on Lafayette Street. It was underneath the Time Cafe. The Charles Mingus Band would play there on Thursday nights. I began working the door there, which is how... anyways, long story, but I began performing there, working the door there. Jeff Buckley, that's kind of one of the places where he began to be known, was playing there. And so I would put on these shows, and I would tell stories kind of like Spalding Gray, these monologues, and I kept hoping to be discovered, and I never was, of course. But then about 12 years later, after performing there, and I had performed there for about a decade, a woman who used to come to my show in like 93, 94, had become a booker on the Letterman show, gave Letterman one of my books to read. He liked it, mentioned it because he was a voracious reader, and he said to her, thank you for that book. And she goes, well, maybe you should have him on. He's really funny. So Letterman began to have me on in 2003 as kind of an eccentric at the end, for 5 minutes.
Right.
And sometimes he would have David Sedaris and David Rakoff, and had me on. And because I was on Letterman, in a sense, that gave me a chance. When I came out to L.A., someone was like, I think there's a TV show in my collection, my nonfiction.
Right.
So the first thing I pitched out in Hollywood was a TV show called What's Not to Love. And I pitched it saying it would be a poor man's Curb Your Enthusiasm, but I said, literally, I'm poor. So as opposed to Larry David, who was quite wealthy. So again, like something I was doing in 93 bore fruit in 2003, 2004 with Letterman. So I always would tell my writing students that, you just put stuff out there. You don't know how it's going to come back to you or when.
Right. And what was it like to meet Letterman on the set? I mean, and people are famously talk. He doesn't talk to you during commercials, and it's like you feel sort of odd sitting there, and then suddenly he's on. Like, what did you have any kind of like warm exchange with him? Did you feel a sense of connect? Because I grew up in Indiana, like not far from where Letterman grew up, and I've always felt like I don't know, he was a big figure in my youth, and I felt like a sense of connection to him, and a sense of reverence. Like I always loved David Letterman, but he's a difficult character. Like, did you have a sense of who he really is, or any kind of...
I would say yes, in that he was very warm to me. And I think, maybe he liked the nuts that would come on his show maybe more than the Hollywood stars or something. And maybe he knew that people like me would be extra nervous. I mean, I remember being in my little dressing room just nervous as hell, and then you're in the wing of the thing, and there was like some older fellow going, okay, go on now, and sort of pushed me in the butt, and I'd walk out, and I felt like, I was having a hypoglycemic reaction, and then there I am shaking his hand, and I'm live on TV, and talking about my balding pattern and his balding pattern, and then also, the way you would prep for it is they're like, okay, and I think they would call me on the phone the day before. Here are the questions Dave might ask, or maybe with the person I would come up with some funny stories, and then they'd be like, all right, here are the questions he might ask. This will trigger these stories that we've discussed, or he might not ask any of these questions, or he might ask them in a completely different order. So it was like, be ready to wing it and be prepared. It was like this weird mix. And he just seemed to get a kick out of me. And in the commercial break, I remember he was really warm to me. And then I think one time my parents came and they got to sit at his desk and have their picture taken. And
oh, wow.
I was on like 3 times. So, he was very kind to me.
That's great.
So that was a fun experience. A long time ago now. Feels like it happened to another person.
Well, and when was that? That was in
2003, 2004, so like 14 years ago.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, I can think to myself, that's not that long ago, but that actually is.
I know.
Almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So you come to Los Angeles. You've never done TV, but you had these Letterman appearances. That sort of stuff can really help. Can help you get in the door, and people say, okay, well, this guy's somebody. Or
Letterman has said he's funny,
right?
Because everyone, we all, or especially the people who make these money decisions, it's a little bit like blurbs in the book business. It's like, okay, someone else has said this is good. I'll believe it's good too, maybe. Or it just reassures them or confirms their own intuition.
Or it gives them something to tell their boss. Mm-hmm. Well, he was on Letterman.
Yeah, and we left a tape, and they liked the pitch. And so, this was 2004, and then I got commissioned to write my first pilot. I didn't have final draft, but I quickly got it and, took a swing at it. And we did shoot that pilot, in which I played myself, but it didn't work out. I guess my standard line, I didn't play myself very well. Lack of self-knowledge and self-awareness has always been an issue.
Well, it's hard. I mean, just to get through the hoop to get to where the pilot is shot, because I've made some rounds with Hollywood meetings and, gotten into the pilot stage, and it's also precarious, and it can seem mysterious. It still is a little bit mysterious to me how these decisions are actually made. It seems like timing's got to be right. It seems like, you got to show up right when they're looking for a certain kind of thing, or you got to be really good in the room. I would imagine doing that live show in New York and being on Letterman especially, that had to have prepared you well to be in the room pitching yourself.
Yeah, I've been, I think, a good pitcher because I become a performer in the room. I also used to be a teacher. And so both being a performer and a teacher when pitching things in Hollywood is helpful because on one hand you have to quickly educate them in a coherent way, and then you want to perform and be amusing. So it's an interesting mix. So I've had some really good luck pitching, I have to say. But in terms of getting things made, and I refer to it once, and I'm quoting myself, as kind of a Swiss clock of luck. So it's got to move as beautifully as a Swiss clock, all these pieces coming together. But like you said, the timing, the moment, and it all has to sort of come together. It's kind of incredible. I mean, for me with Bored to Death, I mean, it came together like a Swiss clock, and yet so much luck involved.
Who was who at HBO championed you? Was just this executive that you met with? But was it... The reason I ask is that, in my head, I sometimes think, well, it's got to be somebody who's got transactional power, somebody who can actually press the green light button. Or was it somebody who just championed you to the person who had the green light button under their control?
It was someone who championed me to the person with their finger on the green light button.
And there is
there's an actual green light button. If you go into the room, and there's a red button and a green button. It's like that game Simon or something. The person I went to, now she'll get deluged with emails perhaps, was Sarah Condon at HBO. And I owe so much to her. And she had been an executive at HBO, but then she became someone who had like a producing deal at HBO. And they gave her a New York office, and she could bring things first to HBO, but if they didn't want them, she could take them elsewhere. But she had worked at HBO for like a decade, and now she was kind of, still part of HBO, but also free. It's an interesting combination. And and she was just meeting writers. And does anyone have anything in their desk drawer? This was back in 2007. And I almost missed the meeting because I had told the Hollywood people I'd gotten involved with, you don't have to send me on any more meetings, because sort of what you were talking about. And this one comedy writer had once told me about LA and Hollywood, 1 million meetings, no deals.
Right.
And I would come out here, stay in a motel, have MapQuest, drive all over, meet with really intelligent people, and nothing would happen. And
But it would feel good. Sometimes the meetings, you're like, oh, that was great. I really like that person. Then you never hear from them.
Well, they were usually really like book readers. They love books, a lot of these people. And so nothing happened. And so after about 2 years of coming out here every few months, like some kind of migrating bird, I gave up on it. And I hadn't done any meetings for a year. But then I get this call. There's someone in New York who wants to meet me where I was living at the time. I thought, all right, well, I said no meetings, but so I'll go. And then this particular day, I was out late with my girlfriend at the time, and it was probably pretty hungover. And I literally, it sounds old fashioned. I slept through the time, woke up. It was a hot New York day. I thought, I'm not going to go. And I thought, oh, screw it, go. And I called, got there about 45 minutes late, dripping sweat, major subway ride. I was way uptown, north of Columbia, had to get to Midtown. And then that turned out to be the meeting that probably changed my life.
All right, folks, there we go. That was Jonathan Ames from episode 520. It first aired on May 16th, 2018. A reminder that the full episode, the full conversation, is available in the feed. Just look for episode 520 if you want to hear the full hour with Jonathan Ames. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow the show on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe for free to my weekly email newsletter over at Substack. Join the Otherppl Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this program going into the future. If you have a couple of minutes and you want to do me a favor, please rate this show wherever you listen. Give it a rating, write a little review if that's an option. It helps the show in the rankings. It helps the show find new listeners. If you would like to get an Otherppl t-shirt or a sweatshirt, you can do that at the show's official website, otherppl.com. And finally, if you would like to read my latest novel, it's called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything, available now in trade paperback, ebook, and audiobook editions. I narrate the audiobook, so I'll read it to you. Again, it is called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. All right, so coming up on Sunday, I will be in conversation with Lexi Freeman, author of a new novel called The Book of Ein. A very funny novel, satirical novel, and a great conversation with a very talented author, Lexi Freeman, coming up on Sunday. So, stay tuned.